Hi. Good morning. Tripped you up there, didn't I? Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Shushock, and I am today the grateful to be back pastor here at Edges. I've been out of town the past 2 weeks, and I've missed you. The first, I was helping some of our Edges folks get married in Michigan, and this woohoo, so Michigan? Wow, a little shout out. And this past weekend, I was in the Dominican Republic. Oh, all right. In the Dominican Republic with a team from Edges who are trying to discern a holy partnership for this coming summer. So there's a lot more information about how all of us can get involved with that Dominican adventure, and that will come to you first in this week's Edges email. So if you don't get emails from Edges and you want to be in the know, please today stop by the iPads on the way out. Just be sure we get your email address, and that'll make sure that you're included in the information about what is to come. And then look for your email this week for some exciting news. So, quick pastoral aside, after stepping away for a bit, I just want to say this morning that I don't think there's anybody anywhere who gets to journey with better people for bigger dreams than me. And I know it's not because you and I are anything special. I know it's not because this church is anything special. It's because God's idea for how to make it through in this life with lots of hope is to anchor ourselves in some community we call church. And I believe that as much as I have ever believed anything, which is why I thank God for us. Well, about 3 years ago, at the beginning of a new home group cycle in our church, an 86-year-old man with early dementia walked into our home and sat down in a chair that would become Rick's chair. At first, I got to tell you the truth, I felt stuck. Rick wasn't the home group member I had dreamt about. 86, early dementia. Rick's beard and his vocabulary were sort of equally unkempt. At least once every week, Rick would return to his loop of salient memories, one of which was when he and his new bride Priscilla were in the middle of a combat zone during the war. Rick was a proud war veteran, maybe where his beard and his vocabulary had come from. Every week, Rick would describe the same scene. He would describe the shots and the screams that they could hear just outside their window. He would talk about how it seemed like their tiny apartment was made of tissue paper. He would remember how he and Priscilla had clung to one another. The story always ended with Rick remembering how Priscilla spoke into that silent terror. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through this valley of the shadow of darkness, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff will comfort me. Surely goodness and mercy will even this day follow me, and all the days of our lives." Though it was Psalm 23 that Priscilla was quoting, Rick told the story like it was a page from her own journal, like somehow the scripture belonged to her. That was when I learned that the Bible can tell a person who she is. It can orient her. It can convince her who she is and who she will be. It can whisper secrets about who God is and about who God will be. You see, some scripture is more who's this than it is how to. This wasn't a text for what she should do during this moment. This was a text for her to remember who she was and who God is. For Priscilla, Psalm 23 wasn't an instruction manual for what you should do when you get into crisis. It was a description of the way things are that she needed help remembering. It was her own autobiography made truly nonfiction only as she trusted the words. Sometimes how we hear Scripture makes a big difference. Let me see if I can explain. Last week, as I mentioned earlier, I went to the Dominican Republic, where my friend Joy and her husband Vidal and their 4 children are pouring their lives out for small pockets of girls who need advocacy through ongoing presence. That's it. These girls, who are ages 6 to 16, live in a safe house that's called New Hope Girls. And that's a permanent shelter that's been dreamt by Joy and Vidal in partnership with God. And it's endorsed by the Dominican government because it provides healing and help, and because it provides guardianship. It assumes guardianship for these young survivors of sexual abuse. Currently, New Hope Girls is a family of 19 girls under the custody and guardianship of New Hope. Well, I felt really prepared for this trip. Though I've never been to the DR, I've been falling in love with the mission of New Hope for 6 years now. I've formed a friendship with Joy, and I've even traveled with her when she's come here to the States. Also, on this trip, I took 3 folks from Edges with me. I took them so that they could help discern the mission. And I took them to set them up to lead whatever ideas we determined seemed like God. Finally, I thought, most serendipitously, I was stirring with the thoughts of Downside Up, this series that we're in together. The current series, as you know, that we're in at Edges surrounds a set of Jesus' curious sayings that we call the Beatitudes, which is just kind of a convoluted word that simply means the blessings. Anyway, it seemed like providence that I was grappling with this section of the Beatitudes where Jesus blesses meek people and people who crave righteousness. So in chapter 5, verses 5 and 6, Jesus says these words, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." And then, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Well, I was looking especially forward to practicing these instructions on the trip. As some of you know, I'm a real natural at Meek. Seriously, if you list the top 200 traits about Kelly, what you probably think of when you think of me, Meek is probably not one of those characteristics. But I considered an expanded and sort of favorable definition of that word, that if I worked hard, maybe Jesus could bless my efforts to be unassuming, meek, to be a humble learner, to take a back seat, to be more quiet as a church mouse than bull in a china closet. You know, meek. And I wondered if I gave this idea from Scripture my best effort, if I tried very hard to be meek, what big is the whole earth things I might inherit, just like the Scripture says. I thought the Scripture was telling me to try to become meek. And New Hope's mission felt like an opportunity to be hungry for righteousness, you know, to join in the push for justice and restoration and wholeness, you know, righteousness. I was pretty sure we were in for oxygen all around if I just followed what I thought were the instructions from Matthew 5, if we considered the advice of Jesus and decided to, wait for it, be these attitudes. But after I got back on Monday, none of that made any sense anymore. I tried to read about the Beatitudes in Matthew 5 over and over, searching again for all those instructions that would make for us a killer how-to sermon today. But instead, all I could find was Jesus describing his whereabouts, letting his hearers on the mountainside that day know where he would be touring in the event they wanted to follow along. In full disclosure, all I could see was Jesus looking out at the mountainside and noticing that the New Hope girls were in the house. I could hear him naming them without embarrassing them. I could hear him telling all those timid but wide brown eyes that he knew who they were, even though they'd already lost their voices. They were some of the meek ones, the ones who'd been forcibly humbled, forcibly silenced, and kept out of every single sliver of light. I listened as the mention of them confirmed their worst fears. It was, in fact, true. They had 0 chips and no open doors, no power to get anything in the world. Their identity is a kind of humble or meek that is forced but never chosen. This kind of meek hollows a pair of brown eyes. It makes a girl a ghost. It makes her forgotten. And then as I'm listening to Jesus, just as I think he's about to tell them how sorry he is that this is their life, the Beatitudes go on, and I hear him say, "Oh, the meek ones are my favorite." And I am the one who decides who gets access to life's blessings, and I pick you. You, kiddo, are about to get unsilenced. You, kiddo, are about to get undarkened. You, kiddo, are about to get unburdened. And you are going to live with access to every good thing you thought was beyond your reach. Yep, you win. I pick you for blessing. And now on the mountainside, all the wide brown eyes are riveted. And Jesus goes on. There's more, Jesus says to the whole crowd while looking right at the girls. I know some of you on this mountain are starved and parched, maybe so much so that you don't even crave anymore. I know you're further depleted because you've watched righteousness, you've watched goodness and justice and wholeness be the food for other people while you've been stuffed with what no child of God was ever meant to consume. And yet, to be hungry and thirsty in your bones because the world isn't right, to be powerless to fix it, and to be desperate for one who can, that's what it is to hunger for righteousness. And I am the creator and the keeper of all the righteousness in the whole world. And more of that than you could ever hold has your name on it. I know your life has taught you garbage in, garbage out, but no more. I'm going to turn that around. Garbage out, goodness in. I pick you as you are, beautiful, brown-eyed, emaciated child. I'm going to fill you with the best there is. The promise of the Beatitude. If we'd really been there with the crowd of hearers on the hillside that day, I think we would have heard the Beatitudes as Jesus' travel calendar, a description of where he's been and where he will be and what he'll be doing while he's there. And so for the past 2 weeks, we've heard that Jesus picks mourners. Jesus goes to folks who are poor in spirit. Jesus picks the meek ones. Jesus picks those who are starving to death for a little righteousness. Are those all the people Jesus picks? Of course not, but they're the ones we often don't pick with him. And he'll be pouring out affirmation and blessing. He'll be offering advocacy and hope. He'll be granting access and asylum across the board, making it possible for every one of them to have an inheritance. On the mountain that day, Jesus wasn't instructing us with if-then clauses. If we want to get Jesus' blessing, then we need to somehow be meek or figure out how to hunger for righteousness. This wasn't a contest for how we can get Jesus' blessing. No, Jesus was picking some in the crowd that the rest of us just pushed past to find a front row seat. He was declaring his roster and making sure the whole mountain knows who's on it. He wanted all of us to know where he was going to be and what he would be doing. And he described it in detail because he knew it would turn us all sideways. Jesus was describing the ones who need blessing, God's blessing and ours. That's why in the moments before this, Jesus had just said to them, from chapter 4, verse 19, "Come, follow me. Here's where I'll be. Will you go with me?" I remember just this week what I learned about some scriptures from Rick and Priscilla. I remembered that this is not a how-to passage. It's a who's this and how should it change our perspective passage. It's a passage that tells us who people are to God and who they should be to us. It's a description of the way things are given to us because we need help remembering. We need help remembering all the places from which blessing comes. This is a passage that is our own autobiography made truly nonfiction only if we trust it. This is a passage that invites all of us to follow God to any of us who are poor in spirit, to any of us who are mourning, to any of us who are meek, to any of us who are starving to the point of desperation. This is the kind of invitation that Joy and Vidal said yes to, and it's changing access to the kingdom. It's opening the borders for 19 little girls, all of them. Now, there are millions of ways to answer the invitation to follow Jesus. New Hope Girls is one in an infinite number of beatitude moments that Jesus is creating. And to pull every one of these moments off, to pull every one of these blessings off, Jesus wants to be able to say, "We're coming." A whole bunch of us. And it's not because Jesus can't do this without us. It's because Jesus knows that when we all gather around these centers, the energy in the whole world shifts. What's important to the whole world shifts. How God uses that focus to usher in blessing and equality and purpose shifts. So the invitation is for everyone on the mountain to stick with him, to follow him to the overlooked ones because he is about to pull off the biggest miracle of all. Jesus is going to make things right. Jesus is going to restore rightful power and righteousness. Jesus is going to reorient what for all the world looked to us like human downsides and use them to pull all of us up. So let it be. Amen.